The number 7 issue, that by taking promises made to fleshly Israel, we cancel for ourselves the hope of Christians in the Christian Greek scriptures. Of all the issues dealt with here, this one caused the most frequent problems. For years, going back to the early 1970s, I've been steadily challenged by studies and calls regarding our position after 1929 regarding the promises to fleshly Israel. Try as we might to make the hundreds of biblical prophecies referring to Israel, Jerusalem, Zion, etc. mean something other than literal realities, Vivian and I have found this method of interpreting prophecy completely self-defeating in witnessing to those who really know Scripture. Calls only need to ask by what authority we assign spiritualized definitions in our books. What normally follows is the accusation that by attaching such wholly arbitrary meanings to clear-cut terms, we are guilty of rejecting the very word of Jehovah, according to Jeremiah's words in Jeremiah 8 verse 9. I have tried to use prophetic explanations such as presented in the book's Preparation, Rutherford's book, Your Will Be Done on Earth, about Daniel, The Nations Shall Know That I Am Jehovah, How, and The Finished Mystery even, with no success. Calls would simply reply, we were inserting men's ideas into the Bible, twisting scriptures to our own destruction. I must admit, I didn't feel comfortable even while presenting such interpretations. Vivian confesses she would simply hand over to others calls who challenged our teachings on difficult passages of prophecy.
Scriptures, such as the selection under the heading Jews in the Reasoning from the Scriptures book, were also of little help. Inevitably, it would be pointed out that we were omitting significant verses in the context. Some examples would be Matthew chapter 21, verses 42 and 43 is cited in the Reasoning book, but verse 45 is not dealt with.
That's the passage where Christ is giving the parable of the vineyard and saying that what will Christ do to these ones who throw his servants and his son outside the vineyard. And in the two verses that they do cite, it's along the lines of what will Christ do? What will the owner of the vineyard do? He will expel. He will get rid of the workers in the vineyard. Well, in 42 and 43, the question is asked, or the statement is made, he will take the vineyard from them and give it to those who produce the fruits thereof. The problem is, who is the them? And so them in the context, it says explicitly in verse 45 and subsequent 46 that it's the Jewish leaders.
Right.
But they couldn't do anything because...
Right. So I'll continue reading now from the document. If Jesus was indeed denouncing the chief priests and Pharisees, not the Jewish people as a whole, as verse 46 indicates, the parable actually would teach the opposite of what we claim, that Christ's sympathy was still very much with the people, if not their leaders. Matthew 23 verses 37 and 38 is also cited. But how do we deal with verse 39?
That's where Christ is saying that your house is abandoned to you. Again, talking to the scribes and Pharisees in Matthew 23. Your house is abandoned to you, and you will no more see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
That's what verse 39 says. And that's
missing from the Reasoning book.
That's right. Okay, so now I'll continue reading. Opposers use this as a prime example of our devious selectivity in using the Bible, pointing out that the whole of Matthew 23 is an exposure of that generation of religious leaders, not the whole Jewish nation. Verses like chapter 23, verses 4, 13, 37, it is asserted, show that the empathy for the abused lost sheep of Israel was one of the chief reasons for Jesus' vehement denunciations of their leaders.
Similarly, we are accused of wrenching Romans 11, 25, 26, and Romans 9, 6, and also Galatians 3, 27 to 29, out of their original context. What indeed can we answer to Romans 3, 1 to 4, or 9, 1 to 5, or 11, 27 to 32, and finally and fatally Romans 15, verse 8? if, as Paul here asserts in Romans 15, Christ actually became a minister of those circumcised in behalf of God's truthfulness, so as to verify the promises he made to their forefathers. If that's true, our whole case is lost, for many of those promises plainly state Jehovah will atone for and forgive all Israel's sin. And here we list a whole bunch of scriptures from the Old Testament: Micah 7, Zechariah 10, Zechariah 12, Ezekiel 16, Isaiah 44, 45, 54, and Matthew 1:21. The most famous of all messianic prophecies, Isaiah 53, is offered as proof that Christ died first for the very ones who rejected him. Check out Isaiah 53 verses 3 to 8 and verse 12. Also Isaiah 54, 1 to 8. And if this is true, therefore Christ is guaranteeing rather than annulling the covenants with Israel.
Jeremiah 31 verses 31 to 34 is brought up in the reasoning book. And the statement is made that the new covenant was made not with the nation of natural Israel, but with the loyal followers of Jesus Christ, to whom hope of heavenly life was being extended. But here once again we have the whole theory exploded by omitted verses. Where is verse 32? Not one like the covenant that I concluded with their forefathers. That seems to make the promise impossible of fulfillment on anyone but fleshly Israel. And by what leap of imagination can we make verses 35 to 40 apply to anything but literal Israel and literal Jerusalem? According to the 1930 to 85 index, verses 37 to 39 are not even once referred to in the publications. In conformity with this, it is pointed out the application of Jeremiah 31, chapter 31, verses 31 to 34 in the Greek scriptures is to the Jewish Christians only.
Check out Hebrews chapter 8, verses 8 to 12, where that application is made, and that passage from Jeremiah is quoted directly to the Hebrews, the Hebrew Christians. So in the next segment, we'll talk about the greatest obstacle, which Vivian and I had the most difficulty with. What does this Humpty Dumpty method of interpretation do to God's faithfulness?